Reptichip sets the standard for reptile substrates. Made from the highest quality coconut available anywhere in the world, Reptichip allows enthusiasts and keepers to provide their reptiles with the necessary humidity and thermoregulation required for your animals to thrive. You can support the podcast by heading to reptichip.com/snakeboy or visit the link in the description below. This episode is brought to you in part by Exoterra. If you're as passionate about reptiles and amphibians as I am, you know that quality matters. I use Exoterra products on all my reptile and amphibian enclosures, which is why I'm excited to be partnering with them. From naturalistic decor to innovative lighting and enclosures of all sizes, Exoterra has everything you need for your cold-blooded companions. Exoterra, make your reptiles feel at home. This episode is brought to you in part by Unlimited Exotic Pets. Every day is Veranda Day for Nick Lillis, and it shows. At Unlimited Exotic Pets, Nick produces high-quality monitor lizards with a deep commitment to ethical care practices and top-tier nutrition. These aren't just pets. They're responsibly bred, ethically raised animals. Whether you're looking for a new companion, starting a breeding project, or anything in between, Nick has you covered. Unlimited Exotic Pets, keeping and breeding quality without limitations. Love reptiles? Don't miss this. If you're passionate about reptiles, amphibians, and everything cold-blooded, Reptiles magazine is a must-have. Each issue is packed with expert care tips, stunning photography, and the latest news in the reptile world. Whether you're a seasoned herpetologist or just starting your reptile journey, this magazine has something for you. Subscribe today and stay informed on the best ways to care for your scaly friends. For only $14.99 a year, you can step outside your algorithm and get exposure to things that you wouldn't normally see or learn about. My family reads Reptiles magazine, and you should too. Visit subscribe.reptilesmagazine.com to get started. This is the Expert and the Idiot podcast. If you like the show and you'd like to support us, there's a link to our Patreon in the description below. Some benefits include getting access to new episodes up to a month in advance. There's also links to USARK and USARK Florida. If you're not already a member, please sign up. Enjoy the show. Welcome to episode 98 of The Expert and the Idiot. Today I'm talking to Rob Stone, or Bob Rock. And so your reptile business is High Plains Herp, or High Plains Herpetoculture?
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, these days I'm not really hardly selling anything. But I have certainly the website's maintained. If I did have something to sell, a lot of that is given away. A lot of the things that I work with are ESA listed species, Endangered Species Act listed species. So Jamaican boas, Puerto Rican boas that you can't sell anyway. Theoretically, you could sell them within your state, but I don't do that. Just give them away. So yeah, that's sort of the deal with that. And then I have rhino rats. So I guess those would be kind of the only thing that would, someone might see for sale under that banner. But yeah.
So the whatever, like when you're so you could sell it in the state of Colorado, but you couldn't like sell it to somebody out of state and ship it?
Correct. Yeah. So essentially the federal law, right, regulates activity between states. Activity that's solely contained within a state is not within, generally speaking, unless it's been abrogated or designated within federal jurisdiction. So the basis for kind of the law is interstate commerce, gives federal regulation its authority. So if you're not selling them, you're not engaging in commerce that would bring it within the meaning of sort of federal jurisdiction. If it's a genuine gift, then it's not a problem. So, I mean, frankly, all the stuff falls into this box. It's just a question of motivators and community and all these different things that have say black pine snakes, Louisiana pines, these things that are threatened, listed as threatened. And every time you see a classified ad that says, Florida sales only, sure, Florida sales only. You're in Florida, that's where you have this animal, whatever. You could give it away if you wanted to. You could give it to somebody, presuming there's not some state law that prohibits someone from receiving it. They could just give it to their buddy in Texas or, whatever. No problem at all.
Interesting. So is that the case with what is it? Python Meloris?
Yeah, absolutely. The Indian pythons. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Like they're like, you can't sell them across state lines, right? But you could gift them across state lines.
Yeah, if you're genuinely just giving them away, you could do that.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, that's and then like you said, then that's where state regulations would come in. So like
Florida's a problem anyway for that.
Yeah. Some poor bastard like me.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
But no, in general, and so that's why I'm always a little bit cynical, or I take it as cynical, I should say, when folks say, "Oh yeah, what's the market in, or what's the we can't keep those," and the answer is, well, you could. It just would rely on folks doing it out of the goodness of their heart and interest in the species, and genuinely just saying, "Yeah, I'm happy to give them away."
Yeah. Interesting. And why do you think it is that you kind of have gravitated to a lot of those species?
So my own interest is probably a reflection of, I think it goes back to the things that were cool when you start, to be honest.
Yeah.
I remember, so I first really started actively keeping stuff in the late 90s. And I remember one of the early exposures was a Reptiles magazine from somewhere in the middle of 98, something like that. And there was an article on Puerto Rican boas, and it said in there, well, this is not a captive species. This isn't something that would be available. This, it's a dream species. But at the same time presented them as being, they're these super straightforward snakes that do great. There's, don't get too big. They're super cool, all this stuff. And it turned out that wasn't entirely right. In that same framework, you couldn't sell them between states. But there was a community of folks involved with zoo stud book animals that had been around. They're long-lived animals, been around from either prior to listing or that had cleared paperwork and stuff. So it wound up that, there was a very small group of folks that had them and were still working with them. And they're actually I think Graham Reynolds had done genetic work on the captive animals and showed that they actually have diversity far exceeding what you would expect for something that's been an ESCA listed species since, it was on the original CITES listing back in the mid 70s.
Wow.
So, yeah, they've been protected for, since we put in certainly CITES. And the
how are they, how are they like working with them? Are they pretty?
They really remind me of coastal carpets.
Okay.
They're kind of a snake keeper snake. They're very hardy. They're very confident in themselves. They'll eat once you have them started, and they're generally not too bad to start, but they're eating lizards, when they're born in the wild. So as long as once you get them going, they're ready feeders. They're super accommodating. They'll take big food, small food. They'll take it, presented to them. They'll take it left in there. The only sort of, generally speaking, they're not as bad as Timors. They fall into that sort of a box in terms of they have a squeeze capacity and know that, and they also definitely tune into your face. And if they're feeling so inclined, you definitely notice an inclination to bite towards the eyes. And they're considered to be kind of aggro snakes, irascible snakes. I haven't really found that to be true, to be honest. They're not that bad in my experience, particularly if you work with them regularly. You could pull them out without a hook, but that's probably the prudent thing would either be hook or gloves, and then then you should be fine. They're, as I say, they're very confident in themselves. They're really neat, engaging snakes, similar size to how we consider coastal carpet, maybe northern coastal carpets to be now, 5-6 foot, and yeah, a couple inches across, something like that.
Have you seen them in the wild?
I haven't. I really am anxious to do so. A buddy of mine, Dustin Smith, who's over at the North Carolina Zoo, goes down, does a lot of Caribbean boa work, and has gone and seen them in the wild, seen the Grant's Eye in the wild, the West Indian, or the the Virgin Island boas and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm definitely deficient in that. I found rubber boas with Dr. J. Nice. And I think at this point, those are the only boas that I've seen in the wild. So no, I am boa deficient. I've looked for rosy boas several times without success thus far. But yeah, I love rubber boas, rosy boas, and certainly, yeah, Puerto Rican boas would be cool.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like you're very passionate about them. And so would you say that they're temperament-wise more similar to a Timor python with the like are they going to dump urates on you every single time you take them out? Is it like a guaranteed thing?
Not with size, no. When they're little babies, that's sort of their reaction. So as hatchlings, that's their reaction. But I suppose neonates, right, being born live. But yeah, when they're first born, you'll get some of that. Nowhere near as much as Jamaican boas. Jamaican boas are more similar to Timors. I would say the Timors are worse than both of them. But yeah, it definitely would be a continuum from Puerto Rican boas are the least likely to do it to you, particularly with any size and age on them. Jamaicans are probably twice as likely as a Puerto Rican, and then a Timor is probably 1.5 to twice as likely as a Jamaican. Yeah.
Do you keep Timor pythons?
I have kept them 4 or 5 times. I love them. They're beautiful snakes. They feel amazing. Yeah, I've bought and sold them 4 or 5 times. They're, one of my favorite snakes, but that doesn't mean there's something that I want to keep at this point. I think the pair that Owen has that he's doing well with now were a pair that I had gotten as 18-inch little one, 15, 18-inch little ones from Cameron. He'd gotten in some more, yet, I had already, as I said, genuinely over 20 plus years have had them 4 or 5 times. And each time it's been getting small ones when I can. Ones that I had back, I think the first ones I had personally, I had worked with the ones at Denver Zoo a little bit earlier than this, 23, 24 years ago. But the first ones I had at home were doubtless Cameron imports that went, but I got them through Bob Clark, and I'd gotten a pair or a trio. And at that point, I didn't have that many snakes. And so I literally handled them every day from like when they were 15 inches, whatever. And they were actually fine. They wouldn't do anything when you would pick them up because I probably had those snakes, handful of knobtail geckos, rhino rats, and that was it.
Oh wow!
And so they, you just pick them up, and they would act like a corn snake or whatever. Not even a baby corn snake. Subadult to adult corn snake. You just pick them up, and yeah, they do okay. But that literally entailed handling them every day. I then gone off to college and had him over at my buddy Tom Weaver's place, and he kept them the way that people who have lots of snakes keep snakes. And by the time I came back, they had forgotten all about that, and they were just like all the others.
Oh no!
Which
that's
is
too bad that they revert like that. I didn't. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, and I don't know that would help be a helpful condition to breeding them. Right? I do think the lack of stress, or at least the not freaking out continually, like to the extent that feels comfortable. But I don't know if that's actually like how they're feeling, or if are they feeling themselves, or have they lost all confidence whatsoever, right? Halmahera pythons, the humorous thing is people would always refer to them as the tame scrub python. And those I've had even more, man. Those I've probably had 35, 40 of those over, 20 plus years. And people call them tame. And the answer is, when they're super stressed, they may not be expressing it, but that's actually a reflection of them being super stressed. When they're feeling themselves and feel comfortable in their environment, they're no different than the rest.
Interesting. Uh, Tell me about your experience with Halmahera scrubs, because I really like them. I'd like to get a pair at some point in time, especially now that they're, being reproduced more and more in captivity. We're seeing, it seems like, more and more clutches every year.
Yeah, which is awesome. I mean, so glad. And the question we had from the beginning of NPR, Eric and I were chatting about it. We talked about it on, the first time I had been on there. All that stuff is, would there be the same interest once that was true? And fortunately, it does seem like that's held on a little bit, right? When they were, quote, the only python that hadn't been bred, it was easy for people to be interested. But I have been impressed by the fact that people are still interested, still think they're cool, and they genuinely are, right? The reason I wound up getting quite a few, Tom and I got quite a few together, and then I would subsequently get more, is A, they're beautiful, and B, they would come in. I think there wasn't really, for large stretches of time, when they first started coming in, there wasn't the infrastructure in Halmahera to support sending out, essentially the reptile trade, live reptile trade. There wasn't a lot of the infrastructure in place, so they'd have to take these long trips that would result in them suffering kidney damage and not doing well. By the time I was getting stuff from Cameron in 2004, 2005, that seems like some of that infrastructure had come into place. So they already had a bad reputation within the reptile hobby associated with, they never do well and those sorts of things. I think that was it wasn't anything intrinsic to them. I don't think it was just a function of, and it's something, at least I don't think about, I think most people don't think about, is that if there isn't the infrastructure to, get an animal from the wild into captivity, wherever its final destination is, quickly, then that's going to have an impact on that could change over time, right? It's not necessarily that and it could be true that some species or some groups, Asian rat snakes generally, don't do well as wild caught. Some of that's maybe intrinsic to their nature, either individually or as a group. Some of that also could just be a function of, there isn't really the network to get an animal from the field to its final destination in a safe period of time, in a safe manner, in a safe period of time. So by the time we were getting them, they actually did pretty well. The only downside we were seeing is that they weren't small. They weren't massive, but they, and I don't even really, I think Chad Brown had gone out there with Dave and presumably Tracy, and I think Cameron, back in the mid to late 90s on the trip where they first turned him up, leading Dave to write him up. And I think they saw a skin of one that was, I don't remember the exact length, but something like 13, 14 feet. So really big.
What?
For a form that's considered to be, smaller. And certainly for the most part, the ones that I've seen are smaller. But I mean, shoot, this was in the wilds of Halmahera, in the hut, in a village or whatever. They had the skin off of an animal that's been killed, obviously can be stretched as well. So you can get it's not necessarily true to life based on the skinning and drying process. But yeah, it was massive, again, not Kinghornite massive, but big. And,
yeah.
But that could have been a 50-year-old animal. That could have been the largest one that was there, and then when you skinned it, you added 18 inches to it or whatever it was, just in the process of doing that. But yeah, they theoretically can, at least the biggest one, the biggest one out there, at least that one over time got really big. But generally speaking, they're 6 to 8 feet. They're carpet length or thinner. As scrubs are invariably, when people see scrub pythons, if they're not really well versed in it and even then sort of thinking consciously about it, they think scrubs are shorter than they are because they're so thin relative to their length. So that I think of it in the context of the first Kinghorneye that Eric, Chris Salemi, and I found on our first trip to Australia in 2018, that when Eric would talk about it, he'd say, yeah, I don't know, it was 3.5, 4 feet. And I'm like, No, dude, it was 6 feet long. It's that when a 6 foot long scrub python, the body form is similar to what a carpet that's 3 foot long, 3.5 foot long, something like that. So that's why it feels that way, but that's just their body form.
Yeah, that reminds me even of my Timor pythons. It's wild what a small area they can occupy. And then you pull them out and you're like, damn,
They
you've
just keep
gotten
going.
a lot bigger. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
Maclots too. I mean, kind of a little shoelace, under a hide, and you take them out and they have some length to them for sure. Um, so what was your experience like keeping that many homs? Did you run into any health issues where you would, because I've heard about people kind of spontaneously losing them where they just kind of just perish, and is that from just being stressed out or not being kept properly, or are they is it just a fact that, with a wild caught animal, you have no idea how old it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some of all of that, right? And as the just dropping dead thing, for the most part, I think was tied into what I'm saying on the front end before the infrastructure was in place to do it. And I didn't have 30 or 40 at once. The most I probably had at one time would be 8 or 10, something like that. But what actually I'll come back to where you're at, but the humorous part that I didn't get to is that the interest level when I mostly had them was not that high. So we're talking kind of the 2003, 2004 through 2008, 2009, 2010, something like that. The interest level in them wasn't that high, so that invariably Cameron would get some, and then either some or all of them would hang around for a long time, and they'd initially be, I don't know, looking for $375 or $500 a piece, and then they would hang out on the list for 6 or 7 or 8 weeks, and I would know it was coming. That yeah, okay, he's reached the point. His business was based on turnover, so that he doesn't want stuff just sitting around hanging out. That yeah, you wait long enough, and eventually it's going to be, well, they're $200 a piece if you buy 4 of them or whatever it is. And yeah, and so I must have done that 4 or 5 times at least. I also had one of the striped ones that's similar to the one that Steven has now, that I think Chad owns, or however that works. That one I got in 2008. Cameron reached out to me and said, hey man, I got a cool striped one. And I was sort of hemming, obviously it was double or triple whatever the normal price was at that point. He just, texted me, and I was like, yeah, I don't know. And then I saw him, he must have put up an ad for it or something. I was like, yeah, okay. So I had gotten that one. Another in 2005. Yeah, 2005. I got 2 of them that were, I think then when the Natouche paper that talks about the Bushmaster farm, in there's actually a record of Vladimir hatching out Tracii, which would have been the first, certainly the first hatching, if not the first breeding. But yeah, if you read that Natouche paper, it makes mention in there of egg dimensions of Tracii and all this stuff. And based on the size that they came in, and the things that we later learned, all this stuff, I presume those were those babies. They weren't marked as extra or anything like that, but they were the size of hatchling carpet pythons.
Wow.
And so for a long time, the animals I had, and I'd send them over to my buddy Bill Hughes in Tennessee, not the Vegas Bill Hughes, the other Bill Hughes, who's into reptiles, and he must have had them 5 or 6 years. He sent back that striped one, and that one actually wound up dying in shipping when I went to ship to someone else, maybe in 2013, 2014. As I say, it is super cool and interesting that Steven now has one that's that same look. And I think on INAT there was another one with not as extreme of a version, but basically they just have patternless sides, and it's condensed. It's not a perfect stripe on the top, but it's basically gets rid of the side stuff. But yeah, really neat snakes. And the ones that then I had once I got them back from Bill were those. One of them was larger. It wasn't part of that hatching, but a pair of those were the ones that I presume are what Vladimir had hatched that Natouche was referencing in the paper.
Mm.
And the really interesting fun bit about that was, so I got these little, as I say, hatchling carpet size Tracy eye, and they weren't red. And so there were several years where, and people were like, "Oh, all scrubs are born red. You must be wrong. They were bigger than you thought, or older than you." Well, they weren't bigger than I thought. I was like, "Well, I saw them, so and I have pictures of them at that size." But I don't know, probably 15, 18, 20 grams, something like that. I wasn't weighing snakes at that time, not now either. But it was, those must be bigger. We're missing something. So we were in Australia in 2019 when Oklahoma City hatched out that first clutch, and they weren't born red. And that was a fun morning on the trip. Or maybe it was if it was 2018, then it was Eric, Chris, and I. If it was 2019, I think it was 18, based on where we were staying. Yeah, that was a moment of vindication for lots of years of people telling me I didn't know what I was talking about.
Sweet revenge.
Yeah, but no, I'm in general, right? They're living creatures. Anything could happen. On the early days, the whole dropping dead thing, I think, was mostly a function of how the shape they were coming in. Even if they then had, sort of underlying kidney problem or something like that, where they would make it for a bit, but they were already sort of doomed from the start. That might have been part of it. I do think they're less hardy generally, right? Scrub's probably less hardy than a carpet, so that even in equivalent conditions, if a carpet could survive being collected on day X, kept in these conditions, comes through, and it's been 5 or 6 weeks or whatever it is, you're more likely to see issues with the scrub than you are with a carpet. That being said, they're still much more resilient than a ring python or a white lip, something like that, or a Brazilian rainbow boa, where in equivalent conditions the thing's dead in a week, right? Those never even make, it never even happens because they die before they even get enough through the process. It's that variance definitely impacts sort of the things we can see, and probably why what's available is, and those sorts of things as well.
Do you think that having captive bred animals in the hobby is going to radically change that we're going to see more and more people getting these, and they're just going to have a higher success rate?
Well, absolutely. As long as there's interest in doing it, absolutely. Being able to start with, I don't think they're any harder. In fact, I think they're pretty straightforward. The challenges of wild caught ones when they be 4 to 6 to 6.5, 7 feet long is, the usual things, getting them to eat. And then, if you're feeding them birds or, chicks or quail and things like that, tended to help. For the most part, they were pretty accommodating. They could be shy and nervous, so drop feeding them tend to work better than, bursting in on them with tongs. In terms of the animals that I had grown up from, presumably captive hatched in Indonesia, they were super straightforward. Ultimately, that male had died from. I then kept that pair together for a long time, and I had 2.1 with one of those males had come in 2008 or 2009 as probably like a 3-footer, something like that, and I didn't keep them together, but was obviously pairing them. This would be 8 to 10 years ago, and I had put her. I'd gone to pair them during the breeding season, had them together, pulled them apart, was putting them back together, and the female bit and wrapped the male really aggressively in the mid body, and he didn't really recover from that. So I think he probably sustained internal injury associated with that. That wasn't great. And then the female wound up developing a big tumor. Not within, Nick's theory of I think it was, I don't know if it was with you or if it was on a different show. But not a young male. It was, her at 15 or 20 or whatever, just catching a stomach tumor. So, and then I think I sent out the one that had come in at 3 foot, something like that. So, I think they're just like normal snakes. If you can get them in good condition and you treat them with respect and things. And that's why folks are having success now. Blake out at the zoo, Chuck's. I had been to Chuck's place. We'd gone herping out in Southern California for the first time in 21, I think, and was able to see Chuck's adult animals, all the ones he was growing out from that he had hatched out and stuff. And yeah, they were perfectly fine and on point. But to what I had initially started as saying that, yeah, they're not the necessary shy and retiring isn't necessarily their actual condition. It's just a reflection of their stress. One of them that I was messing with that was probably 3.5 foot long, one of his grow outs. Yeah, it was happy to just open its mouth and try and give me a go, but I was watching him and it was just like, nope, we're not going to do that today. But yeah, it just, essentially I had my arm in there checking him out, this sort of thing. And he's like, yeah, I'll give you a run. And I was like, nope, not today. So yeah, they're all good. Solomon and tree boas are the same way. They have a reputation of being super calm animals, but in reality, they're just super nocturnal. So yeah, for the most part, most of them, if you just grab them during the day, you'll be fine. In their real feeding season, they'll still light you up. But yeah, okay, get a red light, red bulb, and reach in the cage. Oh, you think your Solomon Island tree boa is tame? Okay, get a red bulb, pull it out at night and show me. And not so much. Crates are the same way, Bungaris. When you see people free handling them during the day, sure, not something I would do, not my jam. But you really want to impress me with your skill and all your skill and willingness to take risks. Let's do that at night with a red bulb.
Yeah, you'd probably live to regret that choice.
Yeah, weirdly, you don't ever see that. So
yeah. I got to hold one when we went to Dr. Tillis's reptile collection to be able to walk through that, and being able to hold a baby Hom was super cool. What a cool little
yeah, they're
snake
neat,
it
man.
was.
They're beautiful.
So beautiful. I mean, their pattern is just really nuts. And me personally, if the stripe thing, tickles somebody's fancy, that's cool. But man, those bands are gorgeous,
Yeah, and even the variation within that. And I know, folks who've interacted with a lot of them kind of perceive this. There are some that are really heavily banded and have it's consistent throughout, and then you have other ones that it's kind of this faded banding. There's a couple different looks within them, and it's not entirely clear. I mean, part of it, right, is while we have more information with the continued globalization of the world, right, to access to see what's actually going on there with iNaturalist and feedback from the various originators and importers and things like that. I would say that it's something of a black box. I haven't been over there to see them. That'd be awesome, but I don't know it in the same way that I do animals that I've been able to experience in the wild. But is that different populations? Is it a variance within? It's all sort of the same homogeneous population, and you get that variability within it. There was folks thought different things, but again, mostly in a space where there was a lot of information we didn't have visibility into at that point. So
yeah, I think Kush thinks that they're going to be like the most popular scrub python, like once they really take off. And I hope he's right. I think that would be awesome if we saw more of those, and if they kind of became a staple of collections, of python collections. That would be incredible, especially if they're reproducing successfully.
Absolutely. I mean, they're a beautiful size, right? And I'm not trying to scare people off of them, by saying, that when they're comfortable that they'd be willing to bite or whatever. I'm not saying that they're inclined to do so. It's just that they're a snake keeper snake. They're probably never going to be situated to be a beginner species, but they are a beautiful size, really hardy. You can keep them in racks or you can keep them in cages. Feed well, feed readily. Don't when they're feeling themselves, they're a manageable size, a big but manageable size, bigger than a Nauta, bigger than a Tannenbar, right? But and for the most part, Tannenbars are just sort of always pretty aggro and pretty willing to go. I've had a lot of those too. I like those a lot too. But I think Tracia is a beautiful size. They do well. A really good snake keeper snake that wants a scrub python that shouldn't get massive, particularly the way kind of folks are keeping scrubs now. I think you won't really run into problems with it.
So I kind of want to start picking your brain on herping a little bit. How many times have you been to Australia now?
So I've been 4 times.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what is it like? How do you even begin to plan trips, herping trips abroad? What are your tools that you're going to be using, or resources to figure out where you want to go, or are you relying on people that live there?
I would not recommend that. Just in the sense that, and that's sort of what we had seen on our first trip. And this isn't, no shade to anybody. It's the reality of the situation. Is we had a bunch of people. Well, it had come out of NPR starting in fall 2011. And from that point forward, both folks here in the U.S., folks in Australia, would invariably say, "Hey, you got to check them out in the wild. You'll love it." Wound up being true. And B, whenever you come over, we'll drop everything, make it work. We'll tell you the exact spots to go. So in practice, learned experience from herping. It is awesome. My favorite, part of the reptile thing at this point. And it's funny, you'd read Dick Bartlett in Reptiles magazine in the late 90s, and that was the vibe he would get, right? He'd be like, this is actually the best thing. And, he's right, but I think it takes a certain level of, you can't skip steps, right? There's a certain progression for, people that are really into reptiles, and often it expresses itself exactly the way that it did for me. I'm sure there are, folks that don't follow that routine, but I do think mine is sort of the standard routine, of, okay, you're mostly interested in boxes, and then over time you come to perceive it as graduating, keeping less better, and then going out and finding them in the wild and finding the greatest joy in doing that. So that's certainly where I'm at. When we went, then ultimately in 2018, the feedback we had received was basically the place you're most likely, Queensland is probably the best place to go find reptiles if you go, particularly snakes. And if you're interested in carpets, then going up to Cairns is, kind of the play. And that, made enough sense as anything to us. And really it became a function of, I think we bought tickets to Brisbane that had been, essentially it was, hey, we're going to plan this. We'll make it work, at least in terms of going, and then we'll figure out where we want to go from there. And we were getting feedback from Matt Moyle, our friends in Australia, Scott, our various friends in Australia saying, yeah, you should just go to Cairns as a first-time place to go. Interested in carpets, interested in scrub pythons, that's a good place to start. And I think that's certainly true. The hard part is, particularly now as more of a desert herper, herping rainforest is tough. I mean, there is more diversity. There's higher numbers probably overall, but it's difficult to find stuff. Even, being East Coast herping in Michigan is tough. All that leaf litter, that's difficult. The desert's pretty accommodating. Florida, I've, done that a handful of times. That in some ways that's tough, right? There's just so much debris and leaf litter and things that make it challenging at times. But depending on your technique, right? I love to hike stuff up, as opposed, I want to see the snake. So if cruising is the way to see the snake, that's fine. I'll do that. But my inherent preference is to hike things up. I think that experience is amazing.
When you're hiking, are you stopping at every rock or log and rolling it or flipping it? Or are you just on the trail and just eyes peeled for anything that is near the trail or crossing it?
Yeah. So there's multiple, I've had both work and not work. And we even have a discussion of like going fast versus going slow. And that's part of, what you're highlighting there, right? If you're kind of going thing to thing, then you're inherently going to be going super slow. At the same time, a lot of, I think, cruising works, and people on bicycles wind up seeing snakes because they're just up on them very quickly. By the time the snakes are perceiving them, you've closed that distance really quick. So we'll have, when it's a group of folks, sometimes you go fast, sometimes you go slow. Some people do both. We got some doing one, some doing the other. Sometimes it seems like they come out in response to something that just passed by. So that the mating pair of Utah pyros that were on the trail that Dustin came upon after we were going slow and not finding anything. I said, I'm going to burst and go to the waterfall and turn around. And, not 5 minutes behind me, Dustin comes through and there's a pair of pyros mating on, literally locks up on the trail. And it's like, well, I know those weren't there because I would have stepped on them even if I hadn't seen them. So, I mean, it can definitely, there's a mixture of things. I think in general, save in the U.S., in Australia, I would probably recommend just sort of having a good pace and trying to keep your eyes open. In Europe, I think my understanding from Nipper is that it's basically all flipping, and you're just going to a likely spot, and you're going to put in the time to flip all that stuff over. So it varies based on where you're going, what you're looking for. A lot of the things that I find though, my lifer Southern Hognose that I hiked up is earlier this year, right? It's the end of the morning, end of the excursion. I've sort of been out there several days doing it, and I'm thinking, okay, well, it didn't happen. I'm going to have to. We had more on the trip left, but we were getting out of habitat, and it was like, okay, it's done. I pounded through this thing, and I was just trying to point A to point B really quickly. Went through one little stand of good habitat, and despite now perfectly understanding why they look the way that they do with that sort of oak leaf litter mixture, it stood out like it was covered in highlighter. It both blended in perfectly and was right in front of me.
Wow.
And I think that, I certainly have had plenty of experiences that fit in that way. Other times, if you're looking for something that's super cryptic, there's utility in really scanning super closely and just going inch by inch in things that are more likely to be either ambushed or set up. If it's something that's transiting through, I think speed's probably helpful.
And what time of day? I mean, are you hiking first thing in the morning? Are you hiking at sunset to try to find those crepuscular species, or are you going out at night in pitch black?
All of the above. Depends what
Okay.
you're looking for and where you are, what time of year it is, what the conditions are like. All of that would have a factor, right? So that hognose was in early May, and it was warm but not too hot, particularly in areas with tree cover. It wasn't too hot. In the sun, it would be too hot, so you wouldn't anticipate something being out there. We had been out there from early morning, kind of before when it felt like, okay, you could reasonably see something just cruising around out here in non-tree cover. Thought it was done because it was too hot, but within that shaded context, then it was okay. It wound up being perfect. If you're looking for rattlesnakes in general, it depends again where you are. Florida, you're looking for eastern diamondbacks. If it's cloudy, if you have high pressure, so you have lots of cloud action, it's sort of overcast, and maybe it's the mid 70s to the low 80s, something like that. That can be a good time. I've Aspen and I hiked one up doing that. That was set up in ambush. If you're cruising and you're looking for them to be out, then you probably want it to be a little bit cooler than that, or the lower end of that.
I think it was, I guess it would have been in spring. I went out and herped the Everglades, and, we saw cottonmouths and, some Nerodia and a crocodile laying eggs on the side of the road, which was super cool. And then this summer we went up to Georgia, and every hike we went on, I took a hook, and I was like, I want to see a copperhead. And so I brought my hook everywhere we went. I had my hook with me. And, I wasn't in a group of people that were herping. We were out hiking, but I made a point that, okay, it's, the middle of summer, we need to get out as early as possible. That way it's cooler, before the day heats up. And we ended up, and my buddy who lives up there, who hikes a lot, was like, dude, we're not going to see him. He's like, I see pictures of him, on some of these trails on local groups and things like that. But, and sure enough, we're out there hiking, and I think it was my son called it out, or he did. And they were a little bit ahead of us. And there's this copperhead on the trail. And I wonder, like, like it must just, it was just dumb luck. Like I was looking and I was stopping and all that, but I don't feel any pride in seeing that animal. Like it was just like, we just got lucky that it was crossing the path and that it was just pure luck. And that makes it, I don't know, like it's weird. It's like bittersweet. Like like I wish I could say like, yeah, I saw this area and I saw this rock that was hanging over and there was this leaf litter and I went over but it wasn't that at all. Like everywhere I checked that I thought I would find one, I didn't find one. Maybe I was looking at one, and I just didn't see it because they're camouflage. But at the same time, like it's so cool that we did get lucky and that we saw this perfect copperhead that was super duper chill. In fact, he was so chill that, like it was frustrating. It was like, dude, could you like want to be a little upset with me so I could take a picture of you, instead of constantly turning away. But yeah, that was it. That was just dumb luck. That's all it was. It was just dumb luck. There was no skill there at all.
Well, I think that's sort of the misnomer of the thing, right? And maybe it's an inherent frustration to the thing, is that that's most of what it is, man. It's mostly about putting yourself in habitat and putting in the work to do it, whether that's hiking when you don't feel like hiking, or, pushing through, or cruising when you're tired and want to go to bed. It's mostly they present themselves to you. When we'd gone to Utah on that first trip, the whole front half, it wound up being here in Colorado and over there in Utah. It was like our wettest spring, overall wettest year in 10, 15, 20 years, something like that. Really good for going to try and find pyros down in the southwest part of the state. Not ideal for trying to find midget-fed rattlesnakes in canyon country, because of that wet. They definitely, I think there's an inherent knowledge or, characteristic response that they're not going to come out, even into mid-May. If it's essentially, those I think have to move pretty far from where they den up. And we can get, heavy snowstorms through the end of May. Same thing out there. And so I think they're really tight to the den site, so they weren't where they would be, a month or two later, which is where we were looking. And I looked in 1,000 perfect cracks, and there wound up being a rattlesnake in one of them, and that was a Great Basin rattlesnake down in southwest Utah. We hiked, it was something like 40, 50 miles over, 3.5, 4 days to see a dead gopher snake.
Wow.
That had been, and that was cruising, from place to place that we were hiking at or whatever. Because it was just, okay, normally this is a decent time. This year, based on the moisture, they're not responding in the way that they normally do. They're going to be running late. We put a lot of time and effort in for not, to no reward in that part of the state. When we went further to the southwest, we had success because those conditions are really good for the things that are down there. Right. So it actually was helpful for cow kings, sidewinders, the mountain kings, Gila monsters, those sorts of things. Those are things that are helpful for that. But, those same conditions, or, the equivalent seasonality thing that macro condition that we were experiencing wasn't good for the con color.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, what you described to me, man, that sounds like the thing. For the most part, they're not in the perfect crack. When we first went to Australia, Eric was doing what you're talking about, because so many of the pictures of pythons that we see, right, they're kind of framed within the buttress roots of trees. How many scrub python images do you have where they're sort of coiled up in a, circled up inside that buttress root of trees? And the answer is, well, theoretically, you can't touch animals in Australia. So, like, how do you take a good picture? For the most part, you need that containment in some way that, they're probably putting a lid on them, and getting them to coil up in there, and then they're most likely to react to you as the camera instead of just searching for a way to get out of there. So that's it's not necessarily actually a frame of reference or giving you sort of a visual you can go on to, hey, where's my search image? My search image is the buttress roots of trees. Well, we didn't see any in the buttress roots of trees. We did see them, the two scrubs we saw were cruising, 2 live scrubs were cruising, the 2 that had been hit were cruising. Carpets were out cruising. Yeah, they're, for the most part, I think we've trying even to, yeah, we saw one the Darwin carpet we saw in 2019 was posted up in a tree when we were out with Gavin, Keith, and Owen et al. But for the most part, we see those as we're cruising around. We were up from Brisbane on our third trip, probably halfway up to Yeppoon, Rockhampton, that sort of area. So lower central Queensland. And we'd gone out one night and I think we saw 8 coastals, within the span of 90 minutes, something like that. Yeah. When it was going, it was going. And in that area, yeah, they're just thick with them. So, no, what you described sounds like that's herping, man. Yeah, you're out there, you're doing the thing, it's sort of, I liken it, either being meaningful or not, but liken it to fantasy football. I have no idea what the coach's game plan is going to be for a given week. People overestimate their certainty on lots of things, and that would be an expression of it. Like, you can consciously make a poor choice. It's hard. But in terms of making a successful choice, you can set up all the factors you can, and most of it's just putting in the work and just doing it when it sucks and doing it when it's hard and doing it when you don't feel like it, but you just keep pushing, and that's when you're rewarded. That's often the time. And then, some of the time you get lucky within 5 minutes, and other times you find them at the car when you come back, having hiked around and seen nothing for 3 hours. So like that, that's the thing. People want to make it sound, so no, you're saying, oh, you got lucky, and you shouldn't value it, or you shouldn't feel pride in that. No, man, that's the thing. And if someone tells you it's something different, they're fooling themselves or fooling you or both.
Well, thank you. That makes me feel better.
Yeah, no, I mean that's what the thing is. It's just trying. Again, you can make conscious poor decisions, and you do want to try and stack as many positive things as you can, right? Like the places where we found snakes, generally speaking, have been, and I guess we can circle back because I do want to give you useful advice, relative to all this stuff. But in terms of tools to use or even ideation, it's one, basically to me, if you're picking a trip, there's going to be 2 drivers. One, you either have a reason that you're going to a specific place, and then it's a function of what can I find if I go to that place, or it's you want to find a specific thing, and then you want to try and go to the place where it's most likely that you'd find that thing, right? So the first time we went in 2018, there were cheap tickets that got us to Brisbane, I think on the front end and and I think it must have been Brisbane on both ends. So yeah, it was, we flying through New Zealand. It was, Denver. It was just 9 months to a year in advance. If you Google flights, super helpful in terms of you can track if you know when you're going in a general sense, or if you have limitations on your availability, so that you're like in Eric's context, right? He has particular days off. He can take at most a certain length of time off. Those things can frame your context so that even 9 months in advance, and you could look at it and say, okay, I love shoulder seasons. So not full summer, not full winter, like kind of those in between times are kind of my preference. Okay, looking at all the other constraints in your normal life, all these things, you can figure out, okay, if I was going to go, then it would make sense to go, June 3rd to June 15th, whatever it is. Based on where you're going or whatever it is. And then you set your Google alerts. And I can tell you, man, I had set one, we're not going this year, but for Darwin to potentially go look for rough scale pythons, in basically driving out from flying into Darwin, driving south and west. And just within the last week, it was kind of holding steady from Denver at, I call it $1,900 round trip. And then, maybe it's been 2 weeks, whatever, but I've, still didn't unsubscribe from those emails. So I see it go, it's been 1,900 consistently for 3 weeks or a month. And then all of a sudden it's 1,500. And then 2 days, whenever it goes low, the next day it's going to go up. But then the question is it going to go back down or whatever? So it was like 1,900 consistently, then call it 1,500, and then the next day it's 1,800, and then the 2 days later it came in at 12:30, 12:20, 12:30, something like that. And the idea is that if you set that up and you watch that, and the only sort of limiting factor is, as I say, you got to be ready to book it that day, because whenever you see anything do those drops, it will go up the next day. I promise you. Even, you got to book it that day. And if a bunch of people booked on that same day, it might be up, have gone up even, in the time you go to look at it. That certainly can be possible. But you need to be ready to have a credit card to toss it onto or whatever. But the average cost of that flight, and we have lived and learned that, if you're going to Darwin, that's actually further, both further than you'd think from physically, and there aren't as many flights from Brisbane or Sydney to Darwin as there are. So that is one where I would recommend booking it the whole way through, and then you're on a continuous ticket. If you do run into any problems, then being that continuous ticket, like say your flight is late from LA to Brisbane, so you miss your connect. If that's all on a single ticket, then you're solid. They're going to put you on that next flight, no additional cost. It stinks, it's not what you're looking for, but there's no anxiety on your end. You're covered. If you've booked those tickets separately, then there's a possibility you're going to be SOL, and you're going to have to rebook, and that's going to cost you. You're going to be paying an arm and a leg. And Brisbane to Darwin there aren't that many flights, and B, it's not super cheap, let alone when you're having to buy it the day of or whatever. So single ticket on that one, I would recommend. Cairns from Brisbane isn't so bad. We had booked that in advance, but as I say, we went through New Zealand. We booked that 9 months to a year in advance. Me, Denver to Brisbane through New Zealand. Eric, Philly to same thing, but from Philly. And then maybe 6 weeks, 2 months out, we had booked Cairns out of there. I was fine to make mine. They actually wound up getting delayed leaving. You can go back and listen. It was, I think, the Bread Eye Roundtable that they had done. Eric's trying to manage the situation on air, and before we went that first time.
I do remember that.
Yeah. So his deal was that basically the flight crew was going to be timed out. And so it was then delayed. I think it was leaving the U.S. leg was delayed, whatever it was, so that he was then, SOL theoretically on his flight from Brisbane to Cairns. But they worked with him, and it wound up not being a big deal, but they didn't have to do that. But that was sort of what he was going through. He knew in advance that he wasn't going to be able to make that flight. He was going to come in late, all this stuff, and it was a separate ticket. So he was fortunate. He and Chris were fortunate on that. But
what do you what's your go-to flashlight? Do you have one, or do you just have a flashlight and it's just
Yeah, some of both. I've gone through having. I still have one of the first ones that I had gotten. Still does pretty well. Nice little handheld thing. I also then got it's Sofern. Let's see. So Brandon Valentine had recommended, he had bought one. It was the $65 or $70, something like that model. Did pretty well. That, I think maybe because it burns so bright and hot and whatever, it has the capacity to change. When we were in Australia, then mine died. The equivalent one that I'd had probably a year into having it, something like that. I did like it though, so I went for the next version up that probably weighs 1.5 pounds and is twice that much or whatever. And that one is sort of like take down a helicopter with that thing. There's utility to that sometimes, but in terms of long haul capacity and stuff, I don't know that that's what I would recommend. I definitely think it's worth having multiple. Absolutely, having something that you kind of want. Both things, the capacity to have something that'll be low beam, but all reliable, that will be on and can do hours and hours and hours, and you'll be good. And also having something that can go super high capacity, particularly if you're shining cuts or if you're in dense forest, something like that, that also has a ton of utility. And then a headlamp as well, right? Obviously, shining is that I'm not particularly good at. I haven't put in the time to really focus in on that in the way that kind of Scott's talking about. He showed it to us. We've done it with the Amnicola and thing, the gecko, works pretty well for geckos and things in particular. I haven't really been able to work it out for snakes. But I do think there's something to that for sure. That, you want to have sort of the same thing. You want to have a good, consistent light that you feel pretty good about. The one that I use for the most part now actually is like a single band, sort of like the Star Trek thing going on across my forehead instead of it actually has the capacity to do either a spotlight or this sort of general light band, but that holds up pretty well. Yeah, definitely worth checking them out, reading the forums. Paul Duran was just reaching out, expressing to Justin and I, expressing, because he's going to Australia in a couple weeks, and he was saying, that turns out there's an entire Reddit on flashlights
Oh
and all
yeah,
this
yeah.
intense,
He said the
this
same
stuff.
thing in my Discord.
Yeah, so that he's telling us this. I'm like, I don't doubt it, man. But no, I don't necessarily have something in particular. I know Justin likes the coast stuff. I think maybe the headlamp thing that I have is like that. I think there's a ton that works. Just trying to find something, that is reliable and having multiple options so that you're not, I don't know, at the bottom of the Grand Canyon with your flashlights having to run out. That was the thing. Then that's a good good use case to have a portable charger. Either one of the solar jobs or even just something that you can charge up externally and add to it from there, because I was able to toss it in my backpack and charge it while I was, using the other one. That definitely, it wasn't ideal. It didn't run out, when I would have hoped or whatever, but give yourself some options at least.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Streamlight, and I've got a couple of their flashlights that I think they're only like 250 lumens, so they're not like crazy bright, but god dang, they're like bulletproof. And I mean, you can strap those suckers on guns and everything, and they can withstand the shock. So it's like
Sure.
they can be put through the ringer and keep on going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually the thing that had killed the one that I had gotten on Brandon's advice, I think died because I had it in my pocket and just, when what we were doing in the NT on that trip, I think it must have been basically sweat functioning as water killed it in my pocket, after at least, a year into it or whatever. It had held up similarly and all those things. But yeah, that was finally in one night. It, was enough to do it in. So.
Wow. What so when you're on these, herping trips that are a week and a half, 2 weeks long, or it's a fairly long amount of time outside of lizards and snakes and everything, are you documenting and looking at or taking in native birds that you're seeing, mammals, invertebrates, or are you solely focused on the reptiles?
I don't know that much about those other things. I think they're cool. And it's kind of like, oh, that's interesting. For the most part, save some, particularly charismatic things or whatever. The kookaburras, yeah, those are cool. I like those. But relative to, for the most part on the trip, even roadrunners, heck, they eat snakes. I recognize that's not great, but they great relative to sort of what we value. But they're cool. I love seeing them. Other than that, it's kind of a, my bird name designations are, runny bird, flyy bird, swimmy bird, that sort of thing. And or just some of those bird names have, they're interesting names, right? And so pass the time sort of prodding at Justin by saying, oh yeah, that's a this XYZ, problematic, and just kind of tweaking them on that. Bugs, I'm the interesting thing to me is I'm not particularly either into or not centipedes. A lot of folks are really, in the same way folks don't like spiders or whatever. A lot of the folks that I go herping with really don't like centipedes. Which is interesting to me. I think it's maybe it's sort of a snake, but it has a ton of legs. They're very quick. They don't ride a hook well. And it seems like they're pretty irascible. Like they're, very, very willing to bite. Yeah. So I don't know. I think all that stuff's cool. I have enough of an interest to take at least a cell phone picture, when it's something really neat. Happy to see them. With a few exceptions, I'm certainly not diving in saying, oh, keeping a bird lifeless or anything like that. But I can appreciate when Justin sees trogons, down in southeast Arizona, that's a cool bird. That birders are going to that spot to try and see those birds. And so
Yeah.
to find a pair of those, that's subjectively cool. I think that's neat. But it's not really a motivator for me. Just sort of a cool thing. There's so many things I don't know about that I can recognize that doesn't make them less interesting or less cool. It just means that it's beyond my capacity to appreciate at this point. So,
how many centipedes have you run into while herping?
So you see them more in Arizona, mostly Arizona. We've seen them in California. I mean, some of them are pretty neat, man. You flip a log and it's like a little blue scolopendra. That thing was pretty cool. We were just down in Arizona and New Mexico. Dustin, we must have cruised it. I think we cruised it on the road, and Dustin had it on his sandal, and we were out with we'd gone over to Bob Ashley's place, and so Adeline, it was raining torrentially, so Adeline Robinson had been over there at a party that we'd gone to, and she wanted to go cruise for toads because she hadn't done that, and so we were cruising around for toads, and Dustin has a big old scolopendra on his sandal, and it's frantic, doing its thing. I'm trying to hook it, all this stuff. That's good fun. So not something that's really been a concern to me, but I think it's neat.
Do you guys run into a lot of scorpions?
I think way more than I see or appreciate. There's only a handful that I really sort of vividly remember. We've stayed at Airbnbs where there was a scorpion in the shower. Just sort of, oh, look up, hey, buddy.
Yeah.
In Arizona, I think, densities are pretty good. I remember being in West Texas, and there were a couple that actually we did actively see. And then my buddy Tom almost went over the cliff, not in response to that, but, right in that, it sticks out in my mind because of, sort of the circumstance around it and stuff. But I'm positive they're out there. I'm not really looking for them, so I'm not really seeing them, I think. But yeah, they're for sure out there.
Yeah, I used to work with a lady that she lived in Arizona, and she said that she had a pest guy that specifically treated for desert hairy scorpions. And I'm like, God, I'd be on cloud nine. That would be so cool to have them coming into my house.
Tom is down in Tucson now, and he had that same deal. And I guess he was talking to somebody, in same job or whatever, and he was saying that, it's essentially that they'll come over on trees, drop down onto the roof, and then they get in like through the vents and stuff. Because it was like, how are they even getting in the house? And that was apparently the way that it's happening. So
wow, they must just be super tuned into moisture and where it is and how to find it. And man, they must just find the vents and go down.
Yeah,
wow.
Absolutely. He was telling me he got, I think over the summer or something, he rolled over onto one in his bed, and that had prompted the whole questions around all this stuff and whatever. So yeah, it was funny.
Jeez. Yeah. I would not, I love them, but man, I would not want to roll over onto one.
Yeah. So no, it's good. So yeah.
You had mentioned earlier, kind of this, I don't know if you'd call it steps or phases of going through herpetoculture and, kind of, you had mentioned keeping less better. And what does that mean for you when you say that? Like, what does that entail? And,
yeah.
or even just tell me like how has your keeping changed, from keeping a lot of animals to now keeping less better and really enjoying seeing animals out in nature?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a big part of it, right, is sort of what are we getting out of our own experience? And Eric talks about continuously the idea of like the joy of the pursuit even more than the maintenance of a thing, right? And I think some of it's driven by the morph mentality. Some of it's just sort of you go, and when you go to a show, it's super impressive to go to the tables that have some of everything, right? And being a completist person, the idea of keeping all the X, right? All the Nephrurus, all the pythons, all the, well, whatever it would be, right? Or having the whole diversity that's available in terms of localities or whatever it might be, right? It's easy. I've had, there have been times where I've had 4 or 5 dozen rosy boas at once, because there's so many cool localities, and it's just they do all look different. Variable king snakes. I've had same thing, 40 to 50 variable king snakes, and you could tell each one of them apart. I knew what each one of them was. None of them looked the same. They were all distinct. Zanata, a couple dozen of those, and these ones are from Lake Isabella. The high blacks from Lake Isabella versus these ones that are, whatever it is, different range, different look, different range, different locale, all those things. Having sort of the set, whatever that is, both in terms of the acquiring, the getting them, these are, the only person that has these are this person, and you were on the list to do it, and all that stuff. Great Banded King, absolutely, you could easily fall into that. I've, had same deal. But a lot of those overlap, so that it's like, okay, I got a room with hundreds of dozens of each of rosy boas and variable king snakes and alterna and zanata, and my exposure to all of them is just sort of, it's the weekly rotation of you start your clean feed, change the water, all this stuff, and you're working through a bunch of tubs, and then by the time you're back around, you're back doing it again, and that's really the only exposure you have to them. So it's neat, and you can produce stuff, and that's cool. And there was the thrill of the hunt, the whatever of keeping them in that fashion, and then the joy of producing them and selling them and getting people excited about them, and the when you're younger, the money from doing that, and selling people snakes, and that's exciting, and you're the dude. And over time, I'm less interested in all of those things. I haven't bought a snake in several years at this point. Yeah. And it's not, I still, still think about snakes essentially constantly. But, basically where I'm at, what I have, all those things, I'm comfortable with that. And as I say, there is one particularly nice, so it's been a 5 or 6 year process for us to, there's so many different jumping off points here, but I guess I'll finish a thought, and then we can hop back to kind of where you'd started and whatever. But there is one really nice Ocean County Northern Pine snake that's on Morph Market right now that I've been watching that looks beautiful. And I'm not going to do it, but I do know that will be a beautiful snake if you kind of like that look and things. And this year, the group and I found our first for everyone save Mike Curtin in the group, Wild Northern Pine. And that was the expression of, I think, 5 or 6 years we've been going ever since the first time. Well, not the first time, because we weren't into herping at that point, but the first time since we went to Australia that first time. Every year we've gone out there. We've spent at least a day in the Pine Barrens looking for a pine snake. And it finally came through this year. And so those have a place in my heart. That we did pretty well in terms of the total number of field days and whatever. It just happens to have been spread out over 5 or 6 years. And so that was pretty satisfying. So there's a certain appeal to that, but even in that same way, I'm certainly not going to do it. But it is a beautiful snake, and it would be very tempting. So
I can tell you're thinking about it.
Yeah, I check in on it. Yeah, so what I was going to say is that, so we were, just in terms of the herping thing, we went 2018, 2019. We were, just like everyone, had our own little COVID story. We were going to go to Western Australia, March, third week of March 2020. We got super fortunate, actually, that it closed down. We didn't get stuck over there. Western Australia closed really hard, even relative to the rest of Australia to the rest of the world. So, we were a couple days out when it was clear that it was canceled and all that. So that wound up working. It was a bummer, but it worked in our favor. And then we went in 2022. Basically, once tickets were reopened, did the same thing. Set a time, said, hey, we'll go in October. Who all wants to go? Figured it out, and watched for those tickets. And then we went in 2024 as well. So we went last year. And that time we went to the NT, didn't do the single ticket, and saw, there aren't that many connected flights and whatever. So we had some wasted time and all that. I mean, there are things to do. We spent time around Sydney and all that. We had a good time. But yeah, the thing I was going to say is, because of that COVID thing, it became, well, what else are we going to do? Australia pretty clearly that wasn't going to change by October of 2020. It didn't seem like that was going to be super, super available. So, hey, let's figure out something else that we're going to do. And I think Eric had suggested, hey, I kind of like rattlesnakes. And that was literally all it took that set us down the path of trying to find all the forms of initially Crotalus within the United States, then became all rattlesnakes, now all venomous snakes. And as part of doing that, it's really appreciating, well, I love bulls, pines, and gophers, so let's try and find all the Pituophis. Love hognose snakes, let's try and find all the Heterodon. Then there are other sort of one-offs, Senicolas, green rats, need to find those. All these different things. And honestly, the thing that I find the most valuable about having those lists is not even checking them off. It's giving us ideation around the trips and saying like, okay, where do we want to go? Because the first in fall of 2020, we went to West Texas because people go to West Texas. And then it was, we went in the fall, the weather wasn't that great. Let's go back in the spring, go with, what's considered the front end, the prime time. We did that. Well, we're not going to do that. Where next? Let's go to Southeast Arizona. Arizona is a place people go, and then went from having seen, I think in 2020, midsummer 2020, I had seen prairie rattlesnakes here in Colorado. I would, relative to Crotalus, I would have called that 1 of 27. Relative to all rattlesnakes, 1 of 34. We went and saw timbers and copperheads in Pennsylvania and Delaware in 2020. Nice. And that was the start of it. Got us two of 34, I guess if we call it all the rattlesnakes. And now sitting here today, 5.5 years later, I'm at 27 of 34 of the U.S. rattlesnake forums, and I've seen 2 of the 3 corals, 3 of the 4 heterodon, all of them having hiked up at least 1. 6 of 10 Pituophis. So yeah, I mean, it's just fun, man.
When you run into venomous, how are you interacting with them? Are you hooking them? Are you tailing them? Like how do you what are you free handling them? Are you putting them around your neck and taking selfies? Like like what are your boundaries with venomous?
Sure. Yeah, so I like have a hook. Obviously, when we go to Australia, that becomes an issue. So then you're looking for a hook-like functionally, I'd have a hook if I thought I could go through customs without it weirding them out, and because you're not supposed to touch stuff. That's sort of my standard. I'm not super, most of my experience with venomous snakes at this point, not exhausted, but most of it is with rattlesnakes. So those have a particular, pit vipers have a particular response. Accommodates really well to hooking. That's generally it. No, I'm super respectful. I have no desire, positive step 1 for any trip is all hands out of all, certainly venomous mouths at all times, all hands and feet, all appendages out of all mouths at all times. That's definitely a principal concern. When you're talking about elapids in general, their sort of nature makes it more likely that you're going to have to, tail them or interact with them in that way. What I would say, just in terms of going to Australia, other than death adders, I see Lucas turned one up within a couple days. After 4 trips, still something I haven't seen. Yeah. So, but other than that, when you're road cruising, how do you know if it's a python or an elapid? In general, the answer is that the elapids book it away from you. We've had, interactions with northern brown snakes, eastern brown. They clearly just want to get away from you. But if you keep chasing them, then they'll turn around and come back at you. And then they'll, as soon as they feel like they've made their point, then they'll start running away from you again. We had a big northern brown snake in the NT driving back from Kakadu. Owen and I were chasing this thing, and then it would stand up, and come back at us, and then you come maybe 5 feet, come back 5 feet towards us, and then it'd start booking it again. But we kept chasing, so I kept doing. And ultimately, I was like, okay, I think we've pushed our luck on this, Owen. I think we've done what we can do. So I had this half blurry picture of it. Others, when we were in Sydney, we did see a eastern brown snake that it was sort of prototype situation. It didn't make the turn I intended to make. Wind up at this little park area, and this Australian family is sort of getting back in their car, behaving a little bit strangely, and it's, why are they doing that? Oh, because when they went down to walk to the playground or whatever, there was a brown snake. And, that turns into me, jumping down the retaining wall, and hey, let me get a picture of this. And that, it was it was probably in the upper 60s, low 70s, something like that. And was able to get the best photos of brown snake that I've ever gotten because, it was cooled down and was able to, go check it out and see it. So that's the wrong turn brown snake,
Wow.
So yeah, super, big picture answer to your question is, yeah, with a great deal of respect.
Yeah.
Like those.
Well, a lot of these, you guys do some wild hikes, right? Where you're going 5 or 10 miles out. The thought of getting bitten that far out, God dang, you're up Schitt's Creek in that situation.
I mean, yeah, if we, hike down into the Grand Canyon, from the North Rim to go find a guaranteed abyssus, to the extent it's a thing, it's certainly a form, which is why I say forms, not species or whatever. I don't really want to be beholden to the taxonomic anarchy of that. Well, where do you find a Grand Canyon rattlesnake? It's in the Grand Canyon. So let's go hike down. You get towards water, and there you go. You can turn one up, especially when you have a crack team. Justin, Dustin, Eric, Nipper. On that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that was hard enough physically as it was. The answer is, save getting lucky. That would truly be lucky of getting a dry bite or what. And that was a large, thick. That form tends to be shorter, but that was a exceedingly robust animal in good condition, very confident in itself. Yeah, I mean, like, and that's not a nice venom. Like years ago, there's a podcast, Word on the Snakevine, and they had on Mark O'Shea at least once, if not twice. And as part of that, he had talked about going on and he properly framed them as expeditions and whatever. And I think the key point, I'll come to that, but he sort of he made mention of the fact that people had died on 3 of his expeditions. And
wow.
And the host, I think, because sometimes as a podcaster, you can be sort of, it can be a railroad track, right? And you want to, you're not really, not hearing it, you're hearing it but not listening or whatever it is. The host, nice guy, whatever, but he sort of yada yada or just sort of moved on. Whereas listening to that, my reaction is like, hold on, let's press pause. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? And in truth, right, the matter when Mark's talking about expedition, he's talking about going someplace and living there for months, and a large group of people that are living there for months. And that's a context then of like anything could happen. It's not necessarily that you fell off a cliff or got bit by a snake. It's not the same thing as a trip that one of our trips, right? It's you could get hit by a bus. Anything could happen.
Malaria,
right? Yeah. Whatever it is, right? And so it's just not an apples to apples comparison for our thing, but it was humorous, and our goal is certainly to make sure we keep it that way. And some of those places, some of those things, some of the things that the task requires are, that Grand Canyon thing was no joke, man. So my lesson thought out of having done that was like, I'm amazed. It's something like 6 to 10 people die there every year, and it's like I'm amazed the number isn't higher.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, the part that's actually scary and sketchy is not actually where you'd think. When you lose the switchbacks and you're gaining and losing elevation. There, if you go over the side, it's gonna suck, but you're gonna go 10 feet down and slam into the next switchback that's below you. It's like, oh, the part that doesn't look that bad, where you're just, it's relatively steady decline, sort of that middle bit. And there, it's the path is 4 feet wide, and then over the path, there's nothing for hundreds of feet. There's not trees. There's nothing. You will go hundreds of, if you go over, you are going over.
Yeah.
So I'm amazed the number isn't higher, to be honest. That was my feeling out of that thing. And as someone who's not super into heights, that was, challenging in that way as well. But hey, that's where the snake lives. So.
My wife and I took a trip without our kids, which is very rare for us, to Colorado a couple of years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago. And I think we flew into Denver and we stayed in Bailey.
Uh-huh.
And we just hiked every single day. Every single day, like that's a requirement. Anytime we're out of state is we want to hike every single day. It's how we start the day. It kind of gives structure and it's a great way to start the day is being out in nature. And my wife was like, God, I'm like really happy the kids aren't with us because there's so many just drop-offs in Colorado. We're used to Florida where it's all flat ground. And it's like, she's like, the kids would be dead here. They would fall off one of these trails. It was everywhere, like you're walking and you're like, man, this is a pretty sketchy trail, but everybody's out here and you're passing and
yeah,
it's just a different environment, compared to what we're used to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, here's the thing. It's mostly fine and it'll probably be fine. But if it goes badly, it can go really, really badly.
Yeah.
Which is not, not to say not do it or whatever, but it's a consideration. So other things I hop around, sorry about that, but, so much to talk about, so much to say, but, in terms of planning a trip, as I say, so it's kind of figure out you're either driven by a place, maybe you're going to see your relatives and then it's working, from a place out, or it's, hey, I really want to go see an Ellen-bellied python. Well, the good news, bad news is there's functionally one place you can go to do that. So that means that's where you're going, when you're take advantage of all the resources, Google Earth, super helpful. iNaturalist, super helpful. Herp Mapper, super helpful. All of those things have pros and cons in terms of what they're showing you, what they don't. Relative to your maybe very first question when we started herping is like, do you have a plan or not? To circle back on that is like, so we had years of people telling us, hey, when you come, we'll either tell you where to go or we'll go with you. I'm happy to embrace that when that comes through, meaning I love to go out with local folks and whatever, being the ability to pick up their local insight and knowledge, go to the spots that they know. That's awesome. Happy to do it. We've definitely had great success doing that. And some of those, have turned into things where, Dustin had offered to go out and show us when we first went to Arizona. We didn't know each other, but, he knew us from the podcast. He'd reached out. We wound up going out, and now, based on that, he goes on lots of the trips that we do,
Nice.
And that turned into a great relationship. So, I'm happy to do that simultaneously. If, when we went to Australia that time, it then just kind of, the thing I realized, was, and became a never again, was we were sitting there without a plan. It was kind of, what are we going to do today? Where are we going to go? And then that was accentuated when it was like the place we were going to go. Oh, now it's Saturday morning and there's some local bike race that's, going through this place or whatever. And okay, now what? And now we're sort of watching the clock tick by and, feel like you're missing it, not doing what you want to do. Also learned from that trip, we had been kind of centrally based out of one area on the southeast side of Cairns. And so we did a lot of driving. We were kind of, that was fine theoretically, but it was kind of, we were 3 hours drive each direction, every day. Jeez. For different, depending on what we were trying to do. In hindsight, like, yeah, that's probably, you'd want to be someplace lower and someplace higher, someplace further west, whatever it is, but have 2 or 3 places instead of just, sure, there's a convenience when you're, at an Airbnb or hotel or whatever, which I, at this point, like just the ability to use an actual bathroom and take a shower are things that I've come to value. The bed, yeah, that's great. I don't mind sleeping in a car, but being able to take a shower, that's super nice. If we can't do it, we can't do it, right? We hike the Grand Canyon overnight. No place to stay. We're and sure, you could book a campsite down there, but you got to book that like, where the place that would have been the closest to where we were going. People want to go do that. So that book's like a year out and it's on like a lottery and you got to be watching and all this stuff. And it's like, no, we'll just stay up all night. We'll just hike down and hike back up. That, that's the reason to do that. So, in general, I would say that actually trips that we do, just based on work considerations, all these other things, for the most part, my perfect trip is, it depends where we're going. I do think you modulate your energy output and what you're doing and all these things relative to the length of the trip. So if it's a weekend, a short week, a long weekend, something like that, you're going to push really hard the whole time. But even now, 20 plus trips in, I've yet to have one that was with one possible exception, which actually was even then it wound up being fine. But when I go to Florida, those are the only times that I've ever had it be like, maybe this trip is too long. Otherwise, my invariable reaction as the trip's coming to the close, whether we found the stuff or not, is this has been the perfect length of time. This has been great. And so, 3 or 4, if it's something with a condensed area and a quick target, something like 3 or 4 nights, usually is pretty good. Try and hyper focus in an area. If it's hey, we're gonna either a broader range or we're searching for something really hard and it's a bigger group, then those I'll do more like 7 or 8 nights. That's kind of the far end of it. Even Australia, that first time we went, I think we were only in country 5 days, something like that. It was super tight. So that is less than I would do now. Now, if I'm going to Australia, I'd probably look for 7 or 8 nights in country, which means you're gone for 10 days from the US based on travel time, changes in time, all that stuff. But that's not too bad, and that turns into 7 days off work or whatever if you line it up right. So, those are kind of things that I would say. I know Justin likes to go for longer, especially going to Australia. He doesn't totally love that flight. Not that I do either, but when we went through Dallas, it was Dallas to Sydney. I think that is something like the 3rd longest flight that there is actively in the world.
Oh my God.
I think it's basically 16 hours, something like that.
Oh no, God dang. Yeah. I can't even fathom that.
Yeah. So
being in a metal tube for 16 hours up in the air.
Yeah.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah, our last trip, I felt those flights for sure.
What do you do? Like, how do you pass the time, or do you just take like a pile of Ambien and just pass out?
Right. I mean, honestly, those planes that you're doing that on are pretty nice. And I got lucky on that. I was in the last row before the bathroom, and so on that setup there was actually essentially I had it's not big enough to have 3 seats, and so I was in the window seat, but there's an extra, call it 2 feet of space. Because there isn't enough to have a proper seat there. So there's just sort of this extra space, gave me an opportunity. I could stand up there, which is good. Keeping your circulation going is good. Matt, when we had gone to Australia, I think he had weirdness in his feet, presumably based on, that long flight for, I think, months coming out of that, Matt Minatola, know. So that is something to consider. I probably haven't considered it enough. When we finally landed in Darwin on that most recent trip, I looked at my feet and they were like swollen. And I was like, oh, that's not great. They felt a little bit weird, look swollen and stuff. So yeah, it's not, on those super long flights, something to think about for sure. But yeah, you just, and they got that in-flight you got your little video thing. They got all sorts of movies and stuff on there. You got download podcasts, YouTube videos.
Man,
I think when we had gone, the Mark O'Shea stuff had just been uploaded to Prime, so I had downloaded all the Mark O'Shea Big Adventures.
Nice.
Through that, and yeah, you just kind of. I think everyone says going's not too bad because you're so excited.
Yeah.
You have all the promise to look forward to, and when you're coming back, yeah, you don't have that. But you're probably pretty wore out, so you're okay.
Tell me about Florida, because I got to hear your Florida trips, why it was too long. Like because like when I went and did the Everglades, I was super let down. I really wanted to see a Burmese python. I still haven't seen one. That was a huge letdown. So I'd love to hear your Florida herping story.
Yeah, so I've been 3 times, I guess now. The first trip probably all of it comes down to, so, and I've never been herping in South Florida. I've
Okay.
only done kind of what you'd call Central Florida, central into north, basically, north of Orlando up to the state line, basically. And in the main section, I've spent time, obviously going to Daytona for years, going down to Tampa, all this stuff. And I suppose, and one of those trips then was to Tampa. So, in terms of herp trips, I'd call it 3 trips. 2 of those have been Orlando north to the state line, within the main frame of the state, and then one of them was to Tampa. The first trip would have been perfect, but for the fact that, so we had met up, KJ had come out and met up with us. There's this particular gas station that we, had stopped at, and we're all just sort of, shooting the shit and whatever. And, we wind up just turning in onto this other road, and must have been, 20 seconds in front of us, somebody, a local on an ATV hit a 3.5 foot diamondback and just clipped it, So it's like, it's still, spasming as we come up to it, it's synaptically writhing as we come up to it. And I hadn't seen a diamondback at that point. So that was a huge target. Also, the drivers for me there would be a Florida pine, especially on that trip, diamondback, Florida pine, southern hognose. Those were the kind of the motivating species that I was trying to see. And we then spent a week, Nipper it was Nipper, Phil, Eric and I. And so great group, but we were in sort of central to North Florida, and I spent all week trying to replicate that diamondback, trying to find that diamondback, and if that hadn't happened, I probably would be saying that was the best trip ever, because we found a pine snake, found a coral, hiked up a coral, didn't get a picture of it, but saw a big coral.
How big?
Probably 3 foot, something like that, but like thickness of a king snake,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
Yeah. And that was the thing. I had hiked it up and I had nothing, to your point. I had nothing. So what did I do? If it was KJ, he absolutely would have tailed the thing. He is versed in that and all, whereas for me, it was like, okay, again, because it responded to me, it immediately went into sort of the low shrubby, whatever it is. And I thought it was then contained. It wound up, there must have been a hole, basically there was a log and a shrubbiness, and I'm trying to call, I'm using the walkie-talkie, trying to get the group over, so at least, okay, maybe we have tools we can, or at least in numbers, maybe we have a chance at this. And no, eventually got everyone, but it took 10 minutes to get somebody else and whatever, and it must have been able to go under the sand. That being said, I have, when I went on the most recent Florida trip in May of this year, did cruise a coral and got pictures and everything, and so no worries. So all good.
Nice.
That's ticked off. Not only found but photographed. So that first trip probably was mostly a function of that diamondback thing, and then just spending the whole trip, like when we're in that habitat, of going, I know they're here, where are you? And that sort of pressure, stress, anxiety, whatever it is, definitely has a dampening effect. And that was part of it. The weather wasn't good. It was, so this would be, let's see, this would have been fall of 22. And I think there was probably early October, something like that. Yeah, the October, right? We were thinking that. So it's probably that first into second weekend of October 22. And there was a storm that was coming, but was like still sitting off in the Gulf. And so we had shit, cold rain weather for multiple days. We had totally the quintessential experience of, the Stone Death March or whatever, where we're just hiking in the rain for miles and miles in Central Florida, not seeing anything save a shed from a yellow rat snake. I will say, being down there, you'll probably be able to appreciate this. And I don't say it as it's not even a point of pride. It just speaks to sort of the weirdness. I think I have to genuinely be one of herpers that have found multiple corals, multiple eastern diamondbacks, southern hognose, and have never found a live corn snake or a live yellow rat.
You've seen everything I've never seen in my whole lifetime.
Right. Yeah. Like, I've seen all that stuff, but I've never seen a yellow rat snake, and the only corn snake I've seen have been hit.
That's crazy. Yeah, the amount of rats I remember the rat snakes. They were a lot more. I feel like when I was a kid, I saw a lot more of them. I don't, and that's just my experience. But they were always big and super chill, where I could just go up and pick them up as a kid, and they were super laid back. But I've definitely seen less and less of them. Diamondbacks, I've never seen one alive. I saw one half alive. My neighbor intentionally ran one over and then came and told me that it was out there. And I remember grabbing a hook and a bucket and being like, "Where is it?" And I'm like running out, and he's like, "Oh no, it's dead. I hit it with my truck already." And I'm like, "Oh,
it's crazy, man.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Damn you.
I can't with that. But yeah, so it's just sort of a part of that, right, is the areas that we're looking, right? So corn snakes and certainly yellow rats, I don't think are as dense, as you say now, in the places that I've particularly been focused. So there is something to it, but it's just a weirdness, right? It's probably a one of one, as I say, and that's not necessarily a good thing. It's just bizarre.
Yeah. That is bizarre. And especially since you saw that giant coral snake, that's crazy.
Yeah. The one that I have pictures of is probably more like 18 inches, 2 foot, something like that. But yeah, it was genuinely that first one. It was like, that's a king snake, like, yeah, but very clearly not, that purple is just beautiful. They're beautiful snakes, but yeah, you absolutely wouldn't want to take a bite from that, So no, I wasn't going to just leap. What it would have taken is the flying leap. And it's like, that's, at least for me, that's a bad idea.
Yeah. Yeah. The Burmese, I know what you're talking about, like that pressure that you said about the rattlesnake. I felt a pressure to find a Burmese python, and like, first of all, I thought that they were going to be everywhere. I thought that they were going to be just everywhere, like we'd just be driving. Now, what we did see a lot of was green iguanas. We saw a lot of green iguanas. We saw one DOR, freshly DOR, monstrous. I mean, he must have been 4 feet long, I would say, from tip to tip. His head was, I think, pretty well destroyed. I think his head is what got whacked by a tire as he was like on the shoulder of the road. But we ended up seeing a lot of them actually in Miami, like proper, like in the city around the canals, and go full aquatic, leaping off and going into the water and just disappearing like an alligator, which was really wild to see. Agamas, we saw plenty of things, but the berms we didn't see. But then you started to get this sense of pressure and urgency when you would see these 4-wheel drive trucks that were jacked up 3-4 feet high with, the aluminum structure to hold on to and spotlights and everything. And you're like, all right, we're not alone doing this, and we're just in a rental vehicle. And, now I'm starting to feel like this is hopeless, or all of a sudden you see somebody coming your direction in one of those rigs and you're like, this road's shot. Like, it's already done. Like, if there was something, they would have seen it, and it was kind of a very, depressing feeling. We ended up taking the road, through the actual park that brings you to the Flamingo boat ramp. And that road is where we saw the most. I mean, we saw crocodiles, we saw cottonmouths, most of those were DOR and very, very fresh. I think one had to actually be euthanized. I didn't have a part to do with that. It was taken care of by my, my fellow herpers. But yeah, it was kind of a terrible feeling, that sense of urgency that you get. I identify with that. I did not like it, where it was like, there's competition here. Those people, they're out to, they want the skins, they want to kill the snake, which I understand. I know they're invasive, but for me, it was like, I just want to see one alive, you know?
No, I can totally relate. I think the other part, you can have that same feeling even when it's just you see other cars on the road. either, herpers, non-herpers, whatever, non-herpers in the context of don't hit anything. Justin, often, when a car, passes us or vice versa is coming the other way, we'll say, don't hit any snakes, that sort of, screaming out the window.
It's just a funny mental picture.
Yeah.
just Justin yelling at cars.
Absolutely. And that is that feeling. Right. And so I think, again, man, I think you're just hard on yourself. I'd love to see a berm too. I think based on what I understand about where they're at, what that looks like, exactly what you described, the other folks out there doing it. That to me is that's either a bummer of a trip, as you said. That's not something I'm looking forward to, right? In terms of what that looks like, the road that you're going on, the other activity that's going on that road, the likelihood of, someone either the competition for it. That road's a little bit sketchy, there's a whole lot to that, that I think fits in, and makes me, Florida man, Florida folk can be kind of weird, some of that. We had the rainbow people, up on our first trip, where it was like pretty confident that she was missing too many teeth and too many eyebrows to be the proper ingenue for her little story to work. But yeah. And I know in Phil's version, or the other people wanted to stop. No, Phil, and I had to tell him, no one wanted to stop. Everyone wanted to get. No, that wasn't normal. No one was like, oh, we should help this deranged meth head. No one was thinking that. I'm glad that you were there with your pistol against the door for the extent of the interaction that we had. And then I was glad that we left. And that wasn't, I don't want to run into anyone when we're out there. Nobody. I'd rather, there's mostly no one, and that's what I'd like to see, but yeah, it's, no, man, that I think those berms are tough. You can definitely turn them up, right? Jake and Skylar had gone down there, right? And they wound up clipping that one, as they're coming out of it. Again, you kind of just fade. And at the end of the night, we've definitely been there. We're not trying to do that, obviously, but that had happened. Ryan Young, I think, found one. You can turn them up, but it's tough. So that to me is tough, and it's emotionally tough. What that entails is just tough. So I wouldn't beat yourself up about that. There are definitely plenty of places. I don't know where you go otherwise, or if you're really just focused on the berm thing. As I said, that's not where I would go if I was just going to go try and turn up a cool snake, or have a cool herping experience. It's not where I would go.
Yeah, it's hard. There was a lot of pressure. And then, we ended up talking to somebody that was shining on the side of the road, like checking out this area. I think there was like a little drainage thing. We're talking to the guy, and I mean, their characters, it was like, you could say it was like Dog the Bounty Hunter's cousin,
right.
And his wife, and they're sitting there smoking stogies and just total characters. And the guy is like, oh yeah, if you guys want to see some, what you got to do is go on out to this road out here. And they got road stretchers out there. And I remember we're driving away, and it's like the people I'm herping with are like, yeah, you want to, maybe head out that way. And I'm like, they're lying to us. I guarantee you they are trying to put us somewhere where there is nothing,
right.
Or they just went, and whether or not that's my paranoia, I don't know.
Yeah, and you just never know, right? I mean, but I would say too that Phil, not that he's going down that way often, but certainly Florida dude, and Phil's never seen one. So as much as I say Jake and Sky, ran into one, then, and Ryan turned one up, and you can find them. But I think when Aspen, Chris, and that crew had gone down, that they didn't see one. So I just think that's a tougher, I wouldn't feel bad about not having seen one based on one trip, and that's a tough thing to turn up, man. That's a tough nugget for sure.
Yeah. And I went with Glenn McClellan, and,
mm-hmm.
And, he's gone since and been very successful, but I think that he's going with people from University of Florida, or,
right.
people that,
Yeah.
They've pit tagged the animals,
Okay.
some of them. So, it's a whole different expedition then, it's a different adventure. We were just road cruising. I would love to go back and drive through the park. That was our last night, and it was the best night because we saw cottonmouths and crocodiles and it was the most fun that we had the whole time. It didn't feel frantic. And it was the most successful that we were just seeing other snakes. We were seeing other things. And, so hindsight, if I ever go back, it's going to be to herp that road and that's it.
Right.
And just do that road, go back and forth 2 or 3 times and then go home for the night, and just enjoy that. And maybe we went at the wrong time of year too. It was very dry. It kind of ended on a more positive note where we found this guy that works at the park and he was like, I haven't seen one since October because it's dry now. He's like, we got all that rain, all those hurricanes. We had gotten, numerous hurricanes in a row.
Yeah.
And then nothing, and when it dried up, he said they all disappeared. They were gone, and he even told us too that, and you're getting passed by people on this road that are going 55, 60 miles an hour. And they had signs out, crocodiles crossing the road because somebody had smashed into one, a gravid female, and sprayed her eggs all across the road. And this is a road that goes through the state park.
Yeah.
It's so depressing, man.
Right. I mean, there's that absolutely. Absolutely. And it's the same thing when you go to Australia, right? And like our first trip, there was a same scenario described, but it was a, Queensland frilly that, eggs exploded all over the road, and at that point hadn't seen a live frill dragon. My first one is, that's dead on the road with eggs, all over the place and all this stuff. Any road, right? Obviously that's possible. We've been the first scrub python we saw was dead on the road. We were on the road, in, it's the well known for carpet, the jungles out of
Tully.
Yeah. So there's like a road, and we got out there in the so one weirdness to point out, right, relative to sort of our lived experience being in the northern hemisphere, and where we're at is that in here, right, when does the sun come up and when does the sun go down? Particularly in like an active herping time, you're going to say maybe it comes up at 6:30 or 7, and goes down 8:30. When's golden hour? As we're coming into crepuscular into night, probably 8 o'clock, right, 9 o'clock. In Australia, you're basically 12:12, especially when you're up in the NT. So that it's more like 6:30 to 6:30, which is just weird, or if you're in Cairns, whatever. But so that's a thing to account for is when are those timings in a way that we don't necessarily think about. But we were out there 4 hours, from hours before the sun went down, probably, call it 3 p.m. till 8 o'clock at night, something 8, 9 o'clock at night. And it's been, as I say, 8, 9 o'clock doesn't sound too weird, except for the fact that it's been super dark for hours at that point. In that entire time, we were the only car on that road, save for one. There's a power station up there, and it was someone working at the power station. And that snake was in our lane, so they definitely took their work truck, came into the opposite lane to intentionally demolish that 6-foot scrub pipe. That was pretty dark, man. That was pretty dark. Fortunately, they were on the move, and we made it probably 5 to 10 minutes down the road, and that one was just coming out, and so that one was totally fine, and we were able to see it and enjoy it and all of that. But that was a dark 5 or 10 minutes for sure. So it can be a bummer for sure. Same thing with the Diamondbacks, same thing you're describing there. There's I was thinking when I was out with Bill in West Texas most recently, last year, that, seeing gravid box turtles just literally, what is that in the road? Oh, it's eggs from the box turtle, 50 feet up the road or whatever that had been hit, like,
oh no,
just like, literally had shot these eggs out down the road, like just wild. But at other times,
I was hoping it was just a dumb box turtle just laid its eggs in the wrong spot.
No. But other times save them, pulling box turtles off before absolutely that truck would have smashed this thing, either wittingly or unwittingly, so you get to, make a difference for those things too. So, yeah, it's not a reason not to do it, but there certainly are, roads that, as I say, that when you're talking about berm thing, if you can get access to like the power plant and stuff like that, so that you're off of that main thing, I think it'll just be a much better experience, whether you turn something up or not. And I do think you're much more likely to turn something up.
Yeah.
So that's just a whole different deal. That's pretty neat, and that would be worth doing. But just hitting that road that everyone does, that's a little bit scary. Don't love that. And, I certainly wouldn't beat yourself up about not finding one over a couple nights.
Yeah. I think it was 3 nights total. Yeah. And the first night it was like, it started raining on the way out there. And I remember thinking like, oh, this is not good.
Right. This is
a bad way to, it's like, this is not a good way to start.
Yeah. Some places, rain is good sometimes, but it's all about the timing, the temperature of that rain, the ambient temperature, how is it interacting with the sun, in the desert. Oh, rain is good. Well, sort of depends what time it is, right? If it's early enough in the afternoon that you get still some warm up and it's back in the night, but you've got humidity, yeah, that probably is good. If it's late so that the sun's just about to go down and it just crushes the temperature and the road is wet, not super helpful,
Yeah.
All too many external factors, right? The cosmic octopus, the interaction of multiplicity of things, and sometimes they still come out, so it's worth going out, but and when you're there, what else are you going to do? So you might as well. But yeah, it's.
You mentioned earlier constantly thinking about snakes, and I swear, like every day that goes by, I find myself in that situation more and more, where it's like it's just such a huge part of my life, and I'm always and what you said earlier too about, Eric, kind of the chase and pursuing something that's where a lot of the fun is, and it reminds me of something my dad told me when I was a kid, is that the fun about Christmas is waiting for Christmas to come, and then once Christmas comes, then it's over, and so like enjoying that time before it. And these animals, like I'm super picky. So I kind of enjoy that about myself, is that like, if I say I want to get an Argentine boa, well, I'm going to really put in some legwork and try to find one that is going to make me happy long term, that it's from the line that I want, or its lineage can be traced back, or, something like that. Right. And how did you get to this point where you're at in your life, where you're constantly thinking about reptiles and snakes, and you're literally traveling the earth to see these animals?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is somehow it just, there was an intrinsic connection from when I was not necessarily even, have a lot of interest in disparate things, archaeology, have pursued that, in different ways. But probably the time from, 11, 12 years old, something like that. It's just been like, I don't know, a switch flipped where it's just like dozens of times a day, essentially always thinking about reptile. Even trying to manage that of like, okay, well, I have other things that I need to do and deal with and whatever, so it can be, it can be a problem. On another, I think it was on Project Herpetoculture, they used to ask the guests who would come on, Phil and Roy would say like, oh, well, and I forget even the exact nature of the question, but it's like, what's herpetoculture to you or whatever. And Phil Tremper had said, well, it's a disease. It's an obsession. It's a disease, and when I had gone on with him, I had agreed. I said, yeah, I mean, there's nothing else fits in that same box of, that think about as obsessively as much. I don't think there is. So, now it's, and I guess I hadn't really properly finished, your other question of like how, the progression, how do you get here is, I think what I had come to find was when I had just racks and racks of animals, literally hundreds of, all those different things we talked about, having kept basically all the pythons that you can keep and all these different things, that it was like, it wasn't fun to just be walking through the when I was coming up, probably, I would guess a little bit younger than me, but you maybe that makes you even more exposed to the cool thing was, the Barchek thing or the Ben Rennick thing or whatever, the sterile sort of Sipey, Jurassic Park, like, oh, the
Yeah.
lab setting and all this stuff, and just full of animals and all the different things. And someone says, oh, when Nipper says, oh, is an otter cool? And I'm like, they are, and I've had, all these different ones and whatever. And like, if I'm in the context of like still having those, it's like, wow, that's amazing. That's so cool. But keeping them wasn't that enjoyable because it was just another tub to be cleaning. Even when they hatch out, it's like, okay, well, there's that, spike or whatever, but it just was, hey, I would rather go back to where you start, the paludarium with, the,
Yeah.
The white line gecko, the skunk gecko from Indonesia, and you got fish and you got turtles going, all this, in this single enclosure. The ability to just sit there and watch them in the same way, as going out into the wild and watching something do its thing, which is the cool part of hiking them up. That southern hognose. That the coolest thing is, so I'm, going through this stand. I see it sticks out immediately. It's fully stretched out. And it sees me, and it freezes, and then I lay down in the leaf litter, getting into the chiggers, getting hundreds of chigger bites. But I just lay on my belly, and this thing, we're looking at each other, but it's not moving. I'm not moving. I'm probably 18 inches, 2 feet in front of it, laying on my belly. I called Aspen and said, "Hey man, you gotta come over here." Didn't tell him what it was, but said, "Yeah, And it took him about 20 minutes because he, the pin I sent him didn't work and whatever. But so that was 15, 20 minutes, and it was probably the first 10 minutes I didn't even take a picture of it. I was just sitting there looking at it. It was looking at me, and I was looking at it. It wasn't moving, wasn't running, wasn't. It knew I was there. It wasn't like it was not aware of it, but we were just looking at each other. And that's the thing, man. That's the thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, reptiles are cool, man. That's all there is to it. So, come in, I guess the thing I would say, right, relative to keeping a big collection or keeping animals or whatever is, certainly we've gone and found a ton of cool stuff. And I do think there is, a lot of the time, right, when we're talking about Australian or Indonesian animals or whatever, we externalize the the catching of these things, right? Oh, if we're talking Australian stuff, then that's going to be captive bred stuff. It's descended from wild caught and whatever. Well, what are the ethics of that relative to going and catching something yourself? And where I've come to in my own space is saying I never want to. Those are magical moments, right? The breeding pyros on the trail, that southern hognose. Those are magical moments, and I get to take those pictures and stare at those pictures and remember that with a clean conscience and heart. That, like, if you take that home, right? Even if it's legal, whatever, right? If you take that home, you're just running the risk that eventually you're going to lessen or ruin that moment when at some point down the line that animal is a burden, or you perceive it as a burden, or you feel like you're not living up to that animal, what that animal needs, even if you're doing great, and everything's ostensibly going fine, but like other life gets in the way, and you decide to thin out things or whatever. Like, I just don't want to be in a spot now where I would ever run the risk of ruining that moment with those breeding parapyros or that southern hognose or whatever it is. I haven't wild collected a snake in, I don't know, 20 years, whatever it would be. And that's not to say that I think there's something wrong with it. As I say, in the context of Indonesian animals, right? We're just externalizing it. That's the locals' job. We're just paying the money,
Yeah.
It's still happening. So I'm not averse to it from that perspective. It really is more about, I don't want to ruin, potentially at some potential future state, sour that beautiful, beautiful moment that I've had. So that I did want to kind of toss that out there too.
Yeah, for sure. It's so awesome, what you guys are doing on Reptile Fight Club. And, I hear Justin slip it in pretty often, and Eric and Owen. I remember Owen, I can't remember if I was on NPR, if they were on my show, and Owen said, am I doing something for my own convenience, or am I doing something that is going to make the life of the animal better? And he said, like, for a long time we went in the direction of it's more convenient if I keep this way, instead of it's better for the animal to keep this way. And, and now, you hear Justin say it all the time that, he likes observing the behavior, and that he's trying to get away from racks and tubs. And even though he still has them, he is, going more towards the naturalistic enclosures, and creating backgrounds, and, doing the artificial rock work. And I think that it's great to put it out there, and to actually put it that way, that, hey, this is how I keep, and this is how I want to keep, even though I'm not there yet 100%. I'm working on it. It's a goal, it's an aspiration to work towards. And for me, it's so much more rewarding. I keep a lot of my young animals in racks and tubs, and I keep, obviously quarantine animals in racks and tubs. And it's so gratifying when they finally get to graduate into their enclosure. It's so much more satisfying to be able to go up and look at them through the doors, instead of pulling the drawer open and then being like, yeah, what exactly do you want? Right. What do you want, food monkey?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
the thing. I'm trying to get rid of all tubs that I have, to just have the room just be cages. I mean, and obviously you can't keep hundreds of animals, at least given my space limitations, in that context.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm at like 25, and, I'm out of space. I'm tapped out.
Yeah.
It's, my Argentine boa is already in a 6x2x2, and, eventually she's probably going to need an 8x2x2, or, 8x2.5x2, something, so it is, and that's my thing too. That's what helps me pump the brakes on buying more snakes, is like, I'm not looking at, do I have space to put that thing in a tub right now? I have to look at, where is its cage going to go 5 years from now? Right. I only have so much house.
Yeah. And the maturity of that, and I do think that's part of it, right, is when we're, in general, at least on the sort of path that a lot of us have taken, it's more the, wanting, it's always more is more. Less is not more, more is more, and it's more things, and we'll figure that out. And some of that is the flexibility of youth, or the mobility, associated with that, where you're saying you're probably pretty confident where you're going to live in 5 years. Obviously anything can happen to us, any of us, on any day, and things can change or whatever, but like you're probably pretty stable, right, relative to that. When we're the average 18, 22, 23, 25, year old, like a big part of, the reason that, the breeders that have success and sort of consistently produce stuff, right? Nick Mutton, I think he's lived in the same house for 25, 30 years,
Yeah.
Like that stability, we're farmers in that respect. That consistency and stability often, prevents other people from having sort of reptiles is like no other business, man, where your capacity, the differential between your potential to produce things, the actual, what you actually produce, and the intrinsic value of them relative to, like, either as protein, or as something like, if you needed to sell those today, you could have, being in it, there's no other business really that's as neatly, like, or as clearly defined, like, this animal, if I needed to sell it today, I could get X and actually turn that over today if I needed that money, versus what it could produce next year, versus what it could produce if I was here and consistently dealt with it for 10 years, right? The spread on that, I think, is wider in reptiles or other, I was going to say other livestock or other animals and things, but really I don't think the spread is as wide, because the market is built up for cattle and things like that. So there is a marketplace where if you had to sell your cow today, the spread on those things is not nearly as disparate as it is for, reptile, where most of the value is intangible. It's it's not necessarily intrinsic. It's sort of how it's received and how we value it. It's more like gold than it is, a cow. That's a big part of why folks fail, or they grow too big. I see it all the time with the leopard gecko folks, where like the expectation, to be anyone is anyone, then you're producing, you have to have 10 pairs a year at least, to be anybody. And more often they're talking about having 25 or 100 pairs or whatever, and they just they burn themselves out of it, and I think that's another common thing. Again, probably more common with things like leopard geckos that have such a fast turnaround time, and where it is like the expectation is if you're at all serious, then you have a business and you're producing, but again, even if you just had 10 females that were laying, that's, probably 50 to 100, 120 baby leopard geckos. Like, no wonder they get overwhelmed immediately.
Yeah.
And the average like lifespan of a leopard gecko business is certainly less than 2 years, is because, it's this pressure to produce, and then they get overwhelmed, and that's it. They think it's cool, and then they get in too deep, and that's it. So I wish / hope that we can, not have that be the case. Ryan, who actually used to work for Cameron, Clockwork Reptile, it used to always bemuse me, but I actually now love it more than ever. Is he was doing leopard geckos back when I first would have met him, 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. Went out to his house, and he had these groups of leopard geckos in the 2 foot by 1 foot by 1.5 foot or whatever vision cages. It's the sort of thing you could have in a 28 quart tub, and you could have had even more of them in that tub. And he had them, he had a wall of these vision cages that it was leopard geckos, and it seemed anachronistic. It seemed silly. And now I love it more than ever. That it's like, well, actually, I think maybe that was onto something,
Yeah. All right, man. Well, it was great sitting down with you and talking all this stuff. We were all over the place, and I loved it. And is there something else you'd like to add?
No, I appreciate the opportunity. I do listen to the show. I think it's great. It's been cool to, as I say, I think so much of the podcasting thing, right? We wind up talking to a lot of the same folks, but hopefully from different angles and with different prompts and conversations. I know there's stuff here that I've said before, and I know there's stuff that I said here that I haven't talked about. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you doing it. I think it's interesting, and I appreciate everyone listening. And that's about it.
Yeah, thank you, man. I appreciate what you guys are doing on Reptile Fight Club and the NPR network, and that's definitely one of my favorite shows. I always look forward to a new episode coming out there, and the fact that you just said that you listen to my show is very flattering. So thank you. I appreciate that.
No worries at all, man. And we should chat a little bit off thread about herping and stuff. I can help you find. I can't find a corn snake or a yellow rat, but I can help you find those other things.
Okay. Sounds good.